Hey everyone, my name's Dustin Elliott, and welcome back to another episode of the Y2 Podcast miniseries. On this Y2 Podcast miniseries, I look to answer a very simple but important question. How can we ask better questions to live better lives? Now, if you are new to this podcast, then let me welcome you, or if you are a regular listener and subscriber, then let me welcome you back. For those of you joining us today for the first time, this podcast miniseries is broken into two sections. The first section, like today, is where I deliver you short, simple, but thought-provoking, practical and tactical episodes, all designed to help you ask better questions to lead better lives. The second part, coming up later today, is where I find and interview a range of interesting professionals from a variety of backgrounds who all share one common bond. Their ability to do their job largely depends on their ability to ask good questions. So, like we've been hearing over the last 2 weeks with the wonderful Narelle Fraser, who is a retired police detective, we learned how to ask questions like a police detective. Coming up, we're going to learn how to ask questions like a multifunctional designer. And coming up over the future coming weeks and months, we also have quantitative researchers, data scientists, high-priced consultants, journalists, doctors, and a range of other amazing professionals. So make sure you check that out. Of course, if you haven't already, please, and you love today's episode, I should say, make sure you subscribe. These podcasts are meant to really build and grow on each other. You're obviously more than welcome to listen to them in whatever order you want, but to get the most out of it, I strongly encourage you to listen to them in order, and obviously make sure you do check out our guest episodes. If you're listening to this on audio podcast, then this is also viewable on YouTube as well. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can also check out it as an audio podcast. And the guest episodes, the majority of them are going to be audio podcasts. So make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this on an audio podcast, you jump over to our website at projecty2.com, where you can find links, show notes, resources, and a whole range of other things, all about helping you ask better questions. Of course, I want to also give a very big thank you to the Y2 Podcast official sponsor, YZ. YZ, if you didn't know, is an easy-to-use online learning management system that makes it so simple to create and deliver online learning. If you haven't already, check them out at yz.com. That's wyzed.com. You can check out a whole range of videos and even get started with your own 14-day free trial. But with that being said, let's get into today's episode. Now, over the previous two episodes, we started to talk about what is this podcast all about, and also taking stock of where we are now, what questions we're asking, and really trying to get a bit of a sense of some of the strengths and weaknesses we have when it comes to asking questions. Today's episode is going to be the first of really a series of episodes where we're going to really focus on and drilling down into the soft skills that are required to ask better questions. All right. So we're not going to focus too much on really talking about tonality or question frameworks or structures or set or setting or anything else like that. We want to first make sure we have a really good foundation to start out in when it comes to the soft skills. Today, we're going to talk and just do a quick introduction to the two enemies of asking good questions, things that people get tripped up on, and I continue to get tripped up on all the time. We're going to start here, and over the next coming weeks, we're going to really spend a bit of time drilling down into a lot of the things that you're going to hear today. We're going to take them in a lot more detail. So today is really just about introducing the concepts, starting to get the conversation going, starting to look at what we can do, and obviously going to leave you with a small homework assignment. I'll talk more about that at the end of today's episode. So like I said, today we're going to focus on the two main enemies, barriers, if you will, as to stopping us from asking good questions. And I want to tell you a really quick story that really for me highlighted recently. One of them that we all fall victim. We fall victim to both of them, but one of them was a really good experience to really highlight not only the experience of having these barriers come up, but also the consequences, the opportunity that are missed by not being able to ask the right questions. So a couple weeks ago, I was invited to a design thinking workshop held by the wonderful Fiona Triaca and her team at Naked Ambition. And as a quick note, I've actually interviewed Fiona here on the podcast previously in the previous iteration of the podcast. I'll make sure I include links in the show notes. So if you get an opportunity, I really, really strongly encourage you to check out Fiona's story. She's got just an amazing story. But anyway, back to my story. So I went to this design thinking workshop, and basically the backstory goes that we were split into two groups, and we were essentially tasked with either designing an experience or designing a product. I was a part of the experience team, and part of the process that Fiona and her team took us through was that obviously we had to do research, right? And a key cornerstone of research is asking questions. So we were basically in our groups, we were interviewing the people in the other group to learn about their preferences, their buying habits, all the things that we needed in order to be able to create and satisfy our brief. So we were all given a pretty tight brief of what we were looking to obviously do. So off we went, and we're interviewing people in the other groups, and we're having all these conversations, and we eventually get back together, and as a group, we had interviewed the same group of people, and we had the same objective, the same brief. But what's really, really interesting is as we had these conversations, it became really, really apparent to me where there might have been a line of questioning I was going down, but then I stopped and I might have gone somewhere else. And cross-referencing everybody, we were able to, I believe, triangulate to get the right information. But it highlighted for me a few phenomenon which crop up, which stop us from asking good questions. And the major one, and the one I want to first start to talk about, is cognitive biases. Now, you probably know what cognitive biases are. There's a ton of research out there, and a lot of more eloquent, a lot smarter people spend their whole lives thinking and talking about this. So I really encourage you to check it out. But basically, the TDLR is cognitive biases are essentially algorithms that are deep embedded in our brain that we're really not always aware of. And they effectively change how we look for information, understand information, and recall information. And it's this algorithm that's always constantly running in the background. So as we're interpreting information, analyzing that and recalling that to be able to ask questions, it's always running in the background. And specifically, one of the common phenomenons of cognitive biases is what I've sort of branded this autofill process that our brains deliver. So happens to us all the time. I'll give some more examples in a moment. But basically, even in my conversations when I was going through these questions to understand somebody's buying habits and backgrounds, is they would maybe tell me an answer, and I found myself quite often autofilling it. I wouldn't necessarily maybe follow up with a question because my brain would go, no, we got this. I'm just going to solve that for you. You don't have to answer. You can move on to the next thing. And it's something we're all victim to. Now, obviously, you weren't as a part of this wonderful event. I strongly encourage you to check it out. Links as well in the show notes too. But I want to put a couple other scenarios to you. Something that happens to all of us every single day, which highlights this phenomenon and the next phenomenon I want to talk about. So let me ask you, last time you were driving or riding your bike or walking even, and somebody cut you off, what did you think? What did you feel? What did you do? What about maybe recently you sent a message to a friend, right? Facebook, WhatsApp, text, however it might be. And that little red icon, like they'd seen it, they'd received it or whatever, popped up, but they never got back to you. What did you think? What did you feel? What did you do? Or maybe recently you received a short, sharp email, maybe a little bit abrupt from a colleague or a client or a boss. What did you think? What did you do? What did you feel? You see, what happens in life is we are faced with ambiguity in every single thing we do. And common situations like we talked about here have ambiguity permeating through. We don't know why that person cut us off. We don't know why that person didn't text us back. And we don't necessarily know why maybe that person emailed us. Maybe we do, but we maybe don't. The problem is between cognitive biases and dealing with ambiguity or inability to deal with ambiguity, our brain is very much wired in trying to help us deal with both of these circumstances and situations. But more often than not, what happens is between either the autofill, I talked about, cognitive bias or what have you, our brain has a tendency to try to fill these things in or recall information. And that effectively stops us from leading with curiosity. So when that person pulled up in front of us, they might have laid on the horn and maybe flipped him the bird or something like that, whatever we might have done. Or maybe that person that didn't respond back to us, maybe send them a rude email or text message or something like that, or just ghosted them or whatever we do. We don't really know what's going on happening in those lives. Maybe that person that cut us off is rushing to a job interview that they so desperately need to get to because they're a single father of 3 or a single mother of 3. Or maybe that friend is going through some stuff right now. Maybe they're not in the best place and they just didn't really have the ability to respond back to us. Or maybe that colleague or client or boss that sent us that email, maybe they've gone through some problems we don't know about. Maybe they've had a fight with their partner, or maybe just a little bit of low blood sugar and they just probably shouldn't have put that email together, but they had to, right? The problem is situations like this happen all the time. And within this cognitive biases and the ambiguity, effectively we autofill it. We come up with reasons or conclusions as to why or recall the information in certain ways. And both of these things stop us from leading with curiosity. We don't try, or we might try, but more often we're blocked from leading with curiosity because of these particular situations. And more often than not, it actually leads to self-fulfilling prophecy. So we might flip the person off, give the horn, or like I said, and maybe they do the same and we go, see, that person is an a-hole or something like that. That self-fulfilling prophecy that maybe we led with. But it stops us from leading curiosity to be able to try and understand and be able to react to those circumstances as they're actually happening, as they actually are, not as we recall or believe that maybe they are. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot between how to deal with ambiguity and cognitive biases. And like I said, we're going to go through these in a lot more detail over the next coming weeks. But I really want to start to talk about these two main barriers and enemies that stop us from asking good questions. But on that as well too, I want to leave you with a few strategies and a homework assignment on how to start dealing with this. So I think one of the most important things, and maybe I'm just telling you more to tell myself, is don't be too hard on yourself. All right. These psychological factors are baked into our psychology. So quite often than not, we're not even aware that they're running. But one of the things you can do, as you're doing right now, is just becoming aware of them, just acknowledging that they exist and begin to try to catch yourself as you catch them. The second thing, and something I'm going to go into a lot more detail about, is really also looking at developing a mindfulness practice. Something also I've talked a lot about previous in the podcast, and something that personally has helped me absolutely an unbelievable amount, more than I can describe, not only to help me ask better questions, but a variety of other factors. But mindfulness, for me at least, gives me a gap between the input and the reaction. So before I react, before I lay on the horn, it gives me a second to go, okay, well, hang on a sec, let me hold up. Why did that person cut me off? Maybe I cut them off a few moments ago and now they're just cutting me off. Or maybe I haven't responded back to that friend in a while. Or maybe I did do something and there's a reason why that email was maybe short and sharp and maybe a little bit abrupt kind of thing. But it gives me the ability, before I react, before I come to my conclusion, but to develop some self-awareness and to cultivate that mindfulness as to what exactly is happening, and to not react emotionally, but try to react a little bit more intellectually, and obviously being able to ask better questions. The next thing I certainly encourage you to do, sort of coming off the back of the first two, is to reflect on your conversations as well. So obviously, when we have conversations, they're incredibly emotionally cognitively taxing rather. So I'm definitely not naive to think that we're deep in these conversations and we're thinking about what the person's saying and what we're gonna say, and making sure we don't miss our 1:00 meeting, or being a bit hungry, or wondering if the dog's pooping on the carpet or something like that. We've got all these things going on. So quite often it's easy to sort of fall out of that and have these cognitive biases, and obviously our brain, how it deals with ambiguity, wherever you fall in terms of your comfort of ambiguity. But those things might come up to obviously try to help release the cognitive load. So as much as you can, to be aware of that in conversations, but at the same time, also after you've had a conversation or an interaction like that, taking an opportunity to just self-reflect on that, to try to see the signs of either where ambiguity popped up and your brain autofilled it, or necessarily maybe where a cognitive biases might have been at play. Maybe the conclusions you came to and you came away from that conversation, just questioning exactly how you came to them, to make sure that, was it actually something they said, something they meant, or is it something that we interpreted and therefore might have autofilled part of that in? And that kind of leads me to my homework assignment I want to leave you with you today. So like I said, we're going to go through a lot of this in a lot more detail, but I want to just introduce these two main enemies and these two barriers. But a little bit of homework for yourself is just to do exactly what I said over the next week. Now, it's not going to be every conversation, I know that, but as often as you can, where appropriate, after a conversation, and it doesn't matter who it's with. It could be with your kid, it might even be with your dog, probably not your dog, but it could be with your parents, it could be with a colleague, it could be with a friend, it could be with a stranger, whatever it might be. Just take a moment with a Google Doc or a pad of paper or something like that and just maybe self-reflect on that conversation. What did you think? What did you feel? What did you do? Why did you come to those conclusions? What were the responses and information you got? And maybe trying to backtrack back a little bit to it as to why they said or what they said, and reflecting on, again, if there's a cognitive biases at play, as well as is it your brain trying to deal with ambiguity, or are you actually asking the questions in that? But with that being said, I'll leave it at that for today. Again, later up this week, we feature the wonderful Millie, who's a multifunctional designer. She basically works with businesses who are looking to create digital products. Really, really interesting. And Millie also teaches a lot of UX and UI design as well, too. So she has an amazing ability to take these concepts and really break them down into practical, tactical approaches. So make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe to that. Check that out coming up later this week. As always, I'm Dustin Elliott, and I'll speak to you soon. Hey everyone, just before I head off, I want to take another quick moment and thank you very much for joining me for today's episode. As always, a big thank you to our sponsor, YZ. Don't forget to check them out for your own free 14-day trial. Remember, if you like this episode and you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe to the YT podcast wherever you find your podcasts so you don't miss out on any new episodes as they come out. And don't forget to leave a 5-star review if you haven't already. Really appreciate that. Also, make sure you check out our YouTube page if you want to watch many of these episodes online. And of course, you can jump over to the YT Podcast website. That's projecty2.com, projecty2.com, where you can subscribe to our mailing list to get weekly topical articles and resources and a range of additional content not released on the YT Podcast, all focused on helping you ask better questions to live a better life. And with that being said, I'll speak to you soon.